thank you, Josiah, by the way, for getting this together. I don't know if I've said that, but this sort of started, as far as my involvement in this, started with some conversations that you and I had around this whole idea of a lot of people are pushing for convention states to amend the Constitution because, well, we've got to reclaim our country. We've got to, things are going to hell in a handbasket. We've got to fix this. And so, anyway, he and I both felt that that's really not the solution because it is trying to solve the wrong problem in the wrong way. And so then that obviously prompted the question, well, what is the problem and how do we solve it? So that, led to virtue and this idea which Josiah defined for us this morning. It's courage. It's the courage to do what is right. It's also embodies the idea of loving your neighbor,
yes,
of loving God, of all the more personal morality that will follow when we love God. Because if we love God, then we're going to live our lives in a certain way. And we're not going to live in certain ways as well. So the benefits of virtue are many. There are many personal benefits. There are many intangible benefits. There are many benefits to our society. And there are some long-term benefits as well. And oddly enough, some of the benefits of virtue are personal peace and affluence. We're not to live for that. We're not to seek after that. We're to be willing to give it up for something that's worth much more. But sometimes those can't be benefits. We're living out the benefits of the sacrifices that generations before us paid. Now, where we've got to acknowledge that where we're at in our country is that is not going to continue to perpetuate itself unless we personally are willing to perpetuate it. So we're at a point in our country where the benefits are about to run out, and so we've got to see, well, okay, where did those benefits come from, and then we've got to do those things ourselves. So I also want to just mention that we have to when we give up our values of personal peace and affluence willingly, then that means that that's a personal sacrifice that we're willing to make. If we're not willing to make that personal sacrifice, then what will happen is we're putting ourselves in a position where God will be forced to take it from us. Because God, the Bible says, I, the Lord, am a jealous God, and I will not share my glory with another. And He, one day every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. So if we're not willing to do that voluntarily here and now, it will be forced on us later. So this is what we need to understand. So some of the personal benefits that I can see of living within this virtuous mindset and manner of life is, well, obviously you will have courage. You will have courage that derives from something outside of yourself, something larger than yourself. It comes from the idea that we must obey God other than men. It comes from the idea that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. It comes from the idea that all men are created equal. So all of these things all fit together. God will be pleased with our actions. As Benjamin Franklin said, an empire cannot rise without his aid. So our communities cannot take care of each other within our communities without God's aid. And we will leave a legacy to our children as well. And those are the long-term benefits. God told His people, don't just teach your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. So that is something that we're going to have to do.
We add E to that, celestial investments and heavenly rewards. Part of the legacy, but
There's the personal benefit as well that comes from a certain amount of self-sufficiency, that we're less dependent on other people. We live in a society that is bent on outsourcing. We live in an age of outsourcing. So many things we give to other people to do for us. Now, this is sort of the foundation of basic economics, is the idea that going all the way back to some of the Greeks, realized, Aristotle, Plato, realized that a person can't specialize in everything well. At some point, you're going to zero in on something you do well, and that means you're going to have needs that are going to have to be filled by other people who have specialties in areas that you don't. And so we work together. We trade, we buy, we sell, we take care of each other's needs. Well, the problem is, that's the way it's supposed to work. Now, so much of that nowadays, the government has inserted itself, and we've allowed that to happen. And we have even asked for that to happen. We have gotten to a point where in our minds, among Americans, the government exists, especially the federal government exists, to be that safety net. Here in South Carolina, the Midlands had 24 inches of rain in 24 hours. Sewers backed up, dams broke, people's houses were flooded. There were many people here in South Carolina that lost everything, total loss. House, everything inside, cars. Some people even lost their lives. And so we have basically a natural disaster on our hands. Well, what was the first thing that happened in the wake of that? Well, government officials, starting with our governor, ran to FEMA and said, you gotta help us out here. We've got a mess on our hands. FEMA is the federal agency that deals with disasters. Well, one of the distinctive things about South Carolina is a state that tends to take care of our own anyway. So there's already sort of this bent within our own culture that we will take care of each other. And yet, even within that, we still ran off to FEMA. Now, here's where things start breaking down. I heard someone speaking on this several weeks back, and I thought it was interesting because they said, we have houses that are, that they've been cleaned up, all the garbage has been removed, they're sitting there, they're ready to be rebuilt and moved back into, but they can't because of FEMA paperwork. And who knows how long that's going to take. So you've got all these hundreds, possibly thousands of people in South Carolina that are displaced, can't move back into their homes because the federal government is taking too long to process benefits that they're waiting on. Would to God that we would just say, go home, FEMA, and we would take care of things ourselves. And we would do so in an expeditious manner. We can do that. We want to do that here in South Carolina. Why aren't we doing it? So, these kinds of things are personal benefits that we'll experience from exercising virtue. And by the way, I'll just mention, there's nothing virtuous about being generous with my neighbor's money. That's something we need to get through our heads right now. There are some intangible benefits to virtue as well. I mentioned this earlier, we have absolutes restored. We're no longer living at the whims of society, at the whims of a majority that's always fickle. It's easy to manipulate the majority, right? It happened in Jesus' day, it happens today. It's as old as mankind is. The will of the majority is a very fickle thing. So we need to have something larger than ourselves that we live for, that we build our lives around. Aesthetics. So the arts always follow our philosophies. And I wanted to just share a couple of examples that Francis Schaeffer gives of this. He said that there were, both in painting and in music, there was a branch of art called chance art. There was chance painting, there was chance music. You had people like Picasso, who was a famous painter, and you had people like expression of music. And Picasso, he's known for a very fragmented type of art. You look at it and you can hardly make sense of it. It's just all these lines and shapes and colors going everywhere. And yes, these influences found their way into certain jazz styles and rock music of our day. It occurred to John Cage, because he also had another hobby, not just music. He also liked mushrooms. Okay, so there's a scientific term for this, and I don't remember what it was, but he basically liked to identify wild mushrooms and identify the edible ones and identify the non-edible ones. Well, it occurred to him one day, what if I took a chance approach to mushrooms? He realized that he would not live very long because his philosophy of art did not match the real world. And so this is our opportunity that, there are so many wrong philosophies in the way that people look at the world. It doesn't fit the real world. And yes, there is a real world. And we can tell people that. Yes. And we can explain why that is. So, Picasso, I mentioned him. He was unfortunately not a very moral man. He had a wife and a couple of mistresses. And anyway, his favorite one, he painted a portrait of her. Guess what? It's not fragmented. He painted the most beautiful picture of this woman that you could imagine. And she was very proud of it and put it up on her wall in a prominent place in the house. T.S. Eliot, a famous writer, a famous poet, his early works were characterized by a skepticism. And when he experienced a conversion, and then if you look at his works after that, you can see a marked difference in the way that he viewed life and approached life. So when we practice virtue, all of a sudden the world just becomes a more beautiful place to live. So there's an aesthetic benefit here. Ethics are imposed, so we don't have the kind of conundrums that we get nowadays with the medical field of, well, we're not sure if it's ethical to fertilize a sperm and egg in vitro because that's going to die after a certain amount of time, but we have no problem taking life once it's in the mother's womb. Certain hypocritical inconsistencies and ethical problems that we really shouldn't even have to ask. We shouldn't have to ask if this is ethical or not. There are long-range benefits, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because Josiah has already alluded to that. But when you have less dependence because you're willing to take care of your own self, your own family, your own community, you're less dependent on the government to do that. Well, when there's less need for the government to step in, then there's also less need for funding, which means lower taxes, which means a more prosperous economy, which means more jobs. There are fewer needy people because I really believe that many of the needy people exist not just by personal irresponsibility, there is some of that, but also people getting a really unfair shake at life that the government was part of.
Yes.
People would be easier to pull them. It would be easier for people to pull themselves out of poverty if government, if DHEC, for instance, weren't there standing, waiting, and ready to shut down the proverbial lemon stand as soon as it opens up. You didn't get a permit. Oh, you didn't follow these kitchen standards. You didn't do this or that. How did America even live before DHEC? I don't know.
Yeah.
Somehow we did. there's a debate among conservatives, should we have term limits or should we not? Some people say yes, other people say no. I've always been one of those that say yes, we need term limits, and other people counter with that and say no, we're the term limits, the voters are the term limits. And I said, well, that's not working.